Good afternoon and welcome to this ACT webinar on payment transformation, global payment trends and the future landscape. I'm James Lockyer, Development Director here at the ACT. And just before we start, I'd like to run through some technical points about our webinar setup. There's a menu bar across the bottom that allows you to open various windows, and you can move these around your screen, resize them or minimize them. The green button with a question mark on it down there is to help if you have any technical difficulties. And another button opens the Q&A window. You can send in questions by typing in the Q&A window. Don't wait until the end to send in your questions. Just send them in as they occur to you, and we'll be dealing with them at the end of the presentation. And our practice is that we don't disclose any names. I should add that a recording of this webinar will be available on the ACT website in 2 days' time, along with a separate copy of all the slides. We're delighted to have speakers from RBS who have substantial experience in the practicalities of developing and delivering payment solutions. RBS have sponsored today's webinar, so on behalf of us all, I'd like to thank them for that support. The payments space is evolving ever faster, driven by a range of factors such as data processing and technology advances, regulatory impact, new ideas and capabilities from developing markets, particularly China. Increasingly, payments are being perceived as part of the overall customer experience, both in B2C and B2B markets, and thus form part of the overall value proposition. And this extends to the treasurer's internal customers as well as external commercial, financial and individual counterparties. So there's a lot going on, and that's what we will be hearing about today from Damien Richardson, who's Head of Payment Strategy and Innovation at RBS. Damien's a career banker with nearly 3 decades of experience in e-commerce, product management and large program delivery. He's currently responsible for coordinating the development of the bank's payment strategy as well as implementing the innovation framework around payments. And Teresa Connors, who's Head of Payments Market Management at RBS. She's an author of the annual World Payments Report, which facilitates the flow of business intelligence across the industry. She was previously Head of Product Development at the RBS UK Domestic Bank, managing the investment budget and delivering client-centric solutions for both borrowing and depositing. She's currently in an outward-facing spokesperson role on payment banking issues for RBS, participating in a number of external fora, and she currently represents RBS in the EBA. After the presentation, we'll finish with some discussion and as many of your questions as we can get through. So, I think over to my colleagues from RBS. I think, Teresa, you're set to kick off. Over to you.
Thank you, and welcome to everybody on the line. As you've heard, I will be exploring with you some payment data trends, and we'll have a look at both volume, growth rates, and have a look at the UK market as well in terms of where is the market headed. The information I'm sharing with you today comes predominantly from the World Payments Report, which is an annual report we produce in conjunction with Capgemini. And indeed, anybody who would like an e-copy of the report at the end of today's webinar, but please let us know and we'll make sure we get one to you. The report it takes about 9 months in the making, from the first time we have the creative workshop to its delivery and its launch, and it got launched about a month ago, not 2 ago actually, in Singapore at Cybos. The report is a mix of desktop research, but also, and most importantly, because it's relatively Google things, it's also primary research as well. So we interview payment executives from around the globe, and we get a temperature check and say, look, what's really going on in this space? What do you see front of the mind that might be challenging or worrying you today, or indeed you see as an opportunity? And what do you see coming around the corner as well? That was also supplemented this year as well by an online survey. So some of the information that we share with you is a real blend of the input from subject matter experts, as well as data analysis, where we drive some insights out. The slide on the screen now shows the story for globally for non-cash payments. And as you can see, the trend from physical to digital payments, it continues to accelerate. I've been involved in the World Payments Report for about 5 years now. And even at the time of the turning point of the crisis, non-cash payments just continue to grow. The ease of e-payments, whilst people still rely on cash, and particularly in some cultures more than others, the ease to which you can make any payment just underpins the whole growth in the non-transaction space. Globally, in 2014, because that's where we have information ready for at the moment, because clearly we're still going through 2015, there were 389.7 billion payments made across the world, across the globe, and that's non-cash payments. The graph in front of you is colour-coded in green. The deepest pieces of green shows the growth rates, and I must stress this graph shows you growth rates. So the deepest green is for emerging Asia, and the lightest green, you see, is split pretty much across Europe. So emerging Asia grew globally, and this is year-on-year figures from 2013 to 2014. Emerging Asia grew at an enormous 27%, whereas at the other end of the scale, Europe grew at 4.6%. Within the European figure, Germany, the Netherlands and the UK amounted to 3.6% between them. The growth for emerging Asia was particularly supported by growth within China, which for the period in question, 2013 to 14, grew at 37.7%. It's an enormous figure. And in fact, the growth rate within China, or within emerging Asia, if it carries on at the current trajectory, China will become the fourth largest growth rate globally behind the US and Europe combined, and Brazil. That's the one I forgot, Brazil. So that's the growth rate story. If we look then, we say, okay then, what are the number of cash transactions that underpin those growth rates? What's going on there? And this graph shows you the makeup, again, from global regions and how many cash transactions they had per year from 2010 all the way through to 2014. Again, you can see there are growth rates there on the right-hand side between 2009 to 2013, and also, though, for the most recent year in question, 13 to 14. And again, there's the emerging Asia figure at 27%, which you've seen on the previous slide. Now, it's important to say that while the growth rate is bigger in emerging markets, the lion's share of the volumes is still very much in what we call the mature markets in North America and Europe. But nonetheless, if the growth rate continues, as it does in China, as I say, they will eclipse globally the US, Eurozone and Brazil. Something that up until sort of last year recently got an awful lot of airtime when we talk about the volume of payment growth is mobile payments. And globally, mobile payments grew by 170% to reach 4.5 billion transactions in 2014. Again, a huge figure, but the mobile payment story, whilst it's still big, it's probably more interesting in what we can do with the platform and the technology for mobile payments, and indeed technology per se, as to what's exciting and is around the corner. Then the next slide, so we've looked at growth rates and we've looked at the number of transactions. And this one really gets us down to the nitty-gritty of what payment instruments are making up those transactions. And as you see, this slide here shows you the regions across the globe. Going across the bottom is Europe, North America, mature APAC, emerging Asia, LATAM and CEMEA. And the colour coding there, you have the blue for cards, red for direct debits, credit transfers in orange, and checks, which you can just about see in some territories as well, in green. Often we hear about the sort of decline, the decline of cards. Will cards still be here tomorrow? And this graph shows you quite nicely that, yes, cards actually are still the powerhouse in the terms of instruments used supporting e-payments. And in fact, cards usage, it climbed to 62.8% globally, and that was from 60.9%. And these are global figures. Debit cards also slowed globally, but still rose by 11.5%. Previously, their usage had risen by 13.3%. But whatever way you look at it, cards, some type of card payment, is still underpinning the vast majority of payments that are made across the globe. When we say cards as well in the report, we do split between credit and debit card growth, and copies of the report will give you the splits there. I talked about credit transfers being the orangey type box on there, and that is growing at quite a significant pace. And we see that sort of grow because of immediate payment schemes that are now cascading around the globe. We've had faster payments or immediate payments, depending on the terminology, in the UK since May 2008. And our scheme is incredibly strong. In fact, the UK saw 771 million one-off mobile payments just last year alone. And these schemes are sort of being replicated across the globe. And they're in various stages of development as well. You have some countries, such as the US, who are just now talking about a faster payment scheme, whereas you have places like here in the UK and Mexico who have had them for a number of years. But it is most certainly very, very topical and gaining a lot of attention. The other thing to bear in mind with immediate payments is depends on the platform that it's delivered on. Because whilst we have immediate payments for a number of years here, it wasn't built on the ISO 20022 platform, which is really the platform of choice, if you like, for the major developments in the payment space today. Because ISO 20022 and its role in standardizing the payments universe means that we have interoperability. And that's important, the interoperability between both banks and their clients. So there is work in train here in the UK to get us onto that platform so that then when other schemes come on board across the globe, we will actually be able to really, truly do some straight-through processing, or as far as you can, and payments will go from A to B, even if they're cross-border, quite quickly, almost in the way that SEPA does in that respect. Okay. So credit transfer momentum has been maintained, as I say, because of the immediate payment story. And we expect that to rise as schemes develop, especially across Europe. If I look at the UK picture, in 2014, debit card usage grew by 10% in the UK to reach 9.2 billion transactions. And 90% of the UK population today have a debit card, and that rises to 96% for those who are in work. So it's most definitely our card of choice at the moment in the UK. The other thing to bear in mind here is that in times of recession, debit card usage increases and credit card usage decreases because clearly people are wary of taking on extra credit. But even as the economy starts to recover, we have not seen the anticipated decline, the associated decline in debit card usage. We also like a mobile payment in the UK. And when I talk about mobile payment, I don't just mean from smartphones. Mobile payment, when we use the word mobile, particularly in relation to the report, we're talking about payments that are made by any mobile device, be that a smartphone or a tablet or a laptop. Most certainly in the UK last year, 44% of all online payments were made by mobile device. So there's a message here for banks and clients that when we're building our payment propositions, don't ignore the mobile story because it's growing rapidly. The other piece, just to demonstrate that again in the UK, was that of every £100 that was spent in the UK last year, £21 was spent via a mobile device. It's just huge. There's another story that's picking up as well across the globe, but I have UK figures to illustrate it, and that is the role of contactless payments, and that's the payments where you just tap your debit card or the card that has that contactless logo on it, and away you go. You can just swipe it in the shops. Contactless payments grew by 333% in the UK last year. And in fact, just the H1 of this year alone, they grew by 500%. And it's not often I get to quote figures as large as that. There's something driving the contactless story, and most certainly a lot of it has to do with Oyster here in London. People are more accepting of contactless because they've got used to paying for their travel on London transport by using contactless payments. It's helped the adoption case enormously then when it rolls out to places like shops in retail and in other areas such as restaurants and that kind of retail outlets as well. The other thing about contactless is it's a really good example of what we call a holistic payment solution, in that the payment isn't just the be-all and end-all. It enriches people's lives. You don't have to start searching into your purse either for money or get out a card and put a pin in, whilst you're there as well. The other thing it's done, and the payment is secondary, the other thing it's done is that for Transport for London, who are having a huge problem in their ticketing halls with all the queues, is it's reduced markedly all the queues, and again has enriched sort of commuters' lives. Although if you're travelling through London Bridge this morning, you wouldn't believe me. But there we are. So that's a taste of payment trends and what's going on there down the track. So I think my big messages are the growth of China on a global scale. Cards, be it credit or debit cards, are still here to stay, most definitely. Look out for the credit transfer growth rate as well, globally and particularly across Europe with the growth of immediate payment schemes. And also in any payment strategy, do bear in mind mobile and contactless cards. So with that, I shall hand over to Damien.
Okay, thanks, Teresa. Teresa's looked sort of a little bit backwards and a little bit forward. I'm going to probably go a few strides forward in terms of the market trends that we're seeing, and I've covered a few in the slide that you can probably see now. Going through them in turn. Social and mobile empowering consumers, and I think Teresa's mentioned the rapid rise in mobile payments. And again, this is not all about a mobile phone, it's also about the tablets and every other mobile device. And we are seeing as a trend the use of mobile growing rapidly, the more apps that have payments embedded in them. And we're also seeing that it's become a key channel for our customers. And moving from online being a key channel onto let's develop first for the mobile channel. And indeed, that's a lot of the messages that I'm seeing when I go out to see some of our customers say they are developing first for the mobile. And also from a social media point of view, our consumers are using that as a new way to interact, a new way of customer service. And indeed, for us at RBS, I think this is quite an active customer service channel for us, whether it be Twitter or our Facebook. So there's a real change in the consumer expectations around the use of mobile phones, mobile tablets, and also the use of social media. The second theme is the regulatory theme, or the change we're seeing in the regulatory landscape. So I've given two examples. So PSD2, from a European perspective, we will see the introduction of sort of what's been called the third-party payment providers, and a couple of new service offerings such as the payment initiation service provider and the account service provider. This is really the message underneath this is really about opening up and encouraging competition around sort of payments and banking. So I think we'll see quite a shift and a change overall in this industry over the next few years. And this is also from a payment system regulator point of view, the UK is, I think, the only economy that's got an economic regulator around the UK payments industry. Came into force, I think, in April of this year. Responsibility for regulating the UK payment schemes such as BACS, CHAPS, fast payments, and the card schemes. I think the direction that we're seeing is that is looking to open up the access of the payment systems to some more non-traditional providers and smaller providers. So we are involved in the consultation process of that, and I think we'll see sort of more of that as we get into 2016. So overall, the message there, we are seeing quite a shift in terms of the regulatory landscape. On biometrics, so biometrics within RBS, we have Touch ID embedded into our into our online banking mobile app, and very positively received by our customers. I think biometrics is quite a wide range of subjects, and we're seeing different flavours come out, whether it be eye recognition or face recognition or selfie recognition, as I saw the other day, also into heartbeats and things like that. But I think what's clear here is that whatever biometric you use, obviously it needs to be secure and usable, but it's got to fit with what it's trying to do overall. There's no point having something that takes 30 seconds to authorise it if you're trying to do quite a quick transaction. So that also takes us onto blockchain. So blockchain, as you've probably seen in the press, is covering a lot of airtime in the media. There's lots of talk. There's lots of venture capitalists in the market that are investing into blockchain companies. But I guess the challenge is, what is blockchain, and how will this help me in my business? Well, just to give a sort of very simplistic view of blockchain. Blockchain is just a bit of software or a bit of data that you can use. It's a special software that has some mathematical rules behind it that allows you to store information such as transaction data or ownership data on that ledger to allow you to really understand the information that's stored. So the transactions can only be written once, and you cannot change that ledger once it's written, so you can't amend it. So it becomes a permanent record, so to speak. As I said, it's protected by some quite challenging mathematics, and it allows us things to be stored in a safe and secure way. So what does that mean in terms of the payments industry? Well, it does open up some capabilities, and we'll see if a use case stands out in this arena over the next few years. We've seen people have a look at things like international payments. We've also seen use cases have a look at things like contracts and the house deeds has been mentioned. But what are the things that we need that sort of level of trust and understanding? One of the beauties of blockchain is it doesn't need that sort of central record. It can be distributed, and you probably heard the word distributed ledger mentioned in the same breath as blockchain. So blockchain is a method of a distributed ledger. So that ledger is distributed over many parties, and each party has a copy of that ledger. And you have to make sure that integrity of the blockchain is retained. You get a consensus, so everyone agrees that the copy of that ledger is exactly the same. So what does that mean? So I think we've seen a lot of activity. I've seen a number of use cases, as I said, come out. But I think it's very much at its early days, and we'll see. It's an emerging technology. I mentioned a few times to colleagues that this is like the internet was in about 1992. It's there. We think it's a great technology, but we're unsure how to use it. And I think that's almost where blockchain is at the moment. Well, I think we'll see it mature over the next few years, and we'll see some practical applications on it. From an RBS point of view, we're a part of the consortium, R3 consortium, which is looking at the common use, the common standards behind such things as blockchain, and there's also another set of collaborative bodies that are looking at this technology. So I think you'll hear more about this over the next few years. So it's a technology to keep your eye on. Okay, in terms of APIs, Going back to the PSD2, I think the APIs have been in sort of technology space for a long time. I think what we're seeing now is with APIs in the cloud is that starting to, particularly in the banking industry, become more sort of public and in the banking industry used in a more sort of external way. So I think with the PSD2, we'll see external APIs that are available for third-party providers to use. We'll also see it for other service providers, as I mentioned, to use, and we'll see an opening up of the infrastructure to allow more competition. So that's very much a trend, and I think you'll hear the phrase API economy used, sort of where this is really as an ability for other services to be provided on top of a core service that may be provided by a bank. And lastly, the theme that sort of we're seeing is this data and analytics providing better insights. So it's no longer about having lots of quantity of data. It's all about what you do with it. Are you able to use the data that you have and use it in a constructive way? Are you able to merge it with, say, unstructured data, such as what's happening on your Twitter feed, for example, to really understand sort of your business? How do you use the data that you provide to provide you with better range of services? How do you use it to really analyse the business? And from our point of view, how do you use it to provide our customers with more information about their own businesses? How do we use it to provide them with insights to say, actually, if you did this, then something better will happen, or you can improve your profitability? So overall, what we're seeing is quite a disruption. So not only are we seeing the customer behavioural change, in particularly around social and mobile, we're also seeing sort of a very active regulatory space looking to open up and promote the competition, but a series of quite changing technologies emerging at the same time. So from a payments industry point of view, there's quite a lot happening at the same time. So you will see that I think the payment industry has quite identified a number of commentators change over the next few years, driven by those factors.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Thanks so much. That's really useful update and some interesting stuff being posed there. Right, we've got a number of questions coming through. A couple of early ones for you guys. Just looking at Europe, and I think I might just combine these together because I think they might be linked. First of all, in the payment space, particularly in the payment space looking forward, what impact are you guys seeing in the market from SEPA? And I think it might be aligned with this. Have you any feel for the relative growth of contactless payments in Europe as opposed to just the UK, in fact Europe or elsewhere, to be honest?
Okay, look, taking that in order. SEPA, it's interesting, when we did, prior to SEPA going live within the rest of Europe, because obviously the UK is one of the states, there was a lot of inertia, and I used to track the figures as to how many were SEPA ready and SEPA compliant. And it really crawled very, very slowly. And of course, as you got to the deadline, which got moved once, it racked up. And suddenly, not quite overnight, but people were SEPA compliant very quickly. From a data volume trend, we didn't see any impact to figures because I guess we wouldn't, because you're still making the same payments. You haven't changed your payment type just because it's going down. If you like, go through a SEPA pipe. I also did so. I didn't see any change in volume. So therefore we didn't see any substitution effect or anything like that either. Because I touched upon checks, which of course are dying a slow and painful death. Although check imaging might change that. We don't know. That might just make it a bit slower. But I didn't see anything like that from a SEPA point of view. There's one thing about SEPA that was of concern to us and I think could be a bit slicker still, if I'm candid, is that the SEPA was developed on a technical standards approach. So, the regulators didn't say it must all be on this standard and every payment must look like this and everything is uniform. They said technical standards, providing it broadly looks like this. And it does this and that, you can go whatever way you want. Now that's not being as cumbersome as we thought, but I think things could be slicker, things are more And it's something that the regulator is looking at. Damien touched upon PSD2. The regulator is looking at a technical standards approach as well currently for PSD2. So we need to keep an eye on that from the technical standards approach. But from a sector point of view, I haven't seen a huge amount of impact from a trend analysis. Growth of contactless in Europe and beyond. I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I will most certainly go away and provide them to whoever has asked. So contactless is growing quite well in the Netherlands and in Germany, but not in as fast a rate as it is in the UK. And then you have other European jurisdictions where it is non-existent.
And that's a really good illustration that despite sort of globalization, there are particular cultural habits, if you like, in individual territories or regions, which you've got to factor in, as well as, the overall potential developments. It's what people are willing to pick up on.
You do, because if I were to, if I was at a dinner party and there was a quiet moment, and I'd say to you, per head, of the European countries, per head, which country do you think makes the most non-cash payments within Europe? I think people might answer generally Germany, the UK, that sort of thing, but in fact it's Finland. Finnish make the most e-payments per head. And again, it's a cultural thing. The infrastructure is set up there to make it easy. The government encourages it. But as you say, it's different cultural differences which can be quite surprising to us.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. There's a nice question here. It's Damien, I think, might be yours. Asking, is blockchain only used for Bitcoin transactions or other currencies?
Yeah, so I think the answer here is Bitcoin was one of the first applications we saw on the blockchain. So it's a virtual currency. So I think we will see our other currencies be able to be run on a blockchain environment. But blockchain isn't all about virtual currencies. It can be used in other things. As I mentioned, in terms of contracts and reference data and things like that. Yeah. It's a bit of technology that has that security wrapped around it that you can use in various circumstances. Yeah. One of the first public applications was Bitcoin.
Right. So blockchain is a mechanism. It's a sort of transition recording mechanism, and to the extent you attach something to that, it could be basically anything.
Yeah. So in theory, you could run a normal fiat currency on it, effectively, and use it as your ledger system.
Yeah, I know. I was discussing it recently in the context of anti-money laundering.
Yeah.
With the prospect that every dollar you receive, you can trace back to when that dollar was born.
Yeah. So if you look at Bitcoin, you can trace all the way back to sort of when the first block was created, effectively. Yeah. And it's quite an interesting. If you read the history behind the first block on Bitcoin, you'll see that it refers to the headline of the Times on a particular date in the recent events, in recent times. So it can be used for many applications.
Yeah.
And that's the interest from the banks and other people. So it's not the Bitcoin which has lots of regulatory challenges around it, but it's more the technology that sits around it, which is the blockchain.
Okay. Question on data analytics. Are we seeing a killer app emerging? And how are services in the market developing? Yes, it depends what you want to analyse.
I personally have not seen a killer app. I think where data works really well is where it's supporting other things that you're doing, where it's part of the overall thing. I think the best innovations that I've seen are where they are linking together various things to come up with something that can serve customers better. So rather than it being something just about data that provides the service to the end customer, I think data will be part of something that at the end of it will provide an excellent customer service or an excellent proposition for the customer, rather than data in its own right.
And it's integrating the payment flow, which previously you just sort of reconciled your cash book or whatever you did and left it at that. It's integrating your payment information with other information about customers, suppliers.
Not only information, but processes and technologies. So it's creating together. You make the analogy of how does when you're using your iPod, how does it know what your favourite tunes are? It's using that data in the background to pick out sort of your favourite tune in your iTunes. So it's those sort of applications. How do you put together various bits of technology and various elements to come up with something that actually solves a pain point, or is actually something like?
Yeah. There's another neat question here. Posing while the payment landscape is developing rapidly, what's being done with regards to the bank-to-bank infrastructure? I think this question is specifically around recall of payments, but I think, how's the underlying infrastructure developing?
In terms of infrastructure development, we are most definitely going bank to bank, going down the standardisation route, ideally, as I say, using standard 20022, which means that things will get through pipes, if you like, the plumbing of banking quicker. I'm afraid I don't know specifically, though, where we're at with the instance of the recall of payments.
Yeah, I'm guessing that specific question relates to faster payments in comparison to, say, the card networks. I know at industry level banks are cooperating about how do we make that a lot easier and slicker to recall a faster payment. I'm guessing, but I think that's what
there's also something in recall of payments under PSD2 as well, because the PSD2, while people talk a lot about aggregators, people providing aggregated information and being able to make payments directly from the merchant site being taken out of your bank account, there's also as well about recall and shortening the time that's applicable there and the circumstances. So very deeper where the question's coming from.
Well, but you see, I think in the context of the overall conversation, I think it's really interesting, because if you combine new technology with big data and truly integrating the whole thing, I think there's an argument that says actually your incidence of the need to recall payments should fall like a stone, because your system will say, do you really want to pay these guys? Do you really want to pay these guys 100,000 euros because you've only ever paid them 10? And the system will flag it up for you rather than someone physically having to remember.
Yeah, the person that asked the question has just come back. It's not just faster payments. So, I do agree that as things are getting faster and faster and slicker and straight through process, there is a challenge around how do you make sure we can recall it. But then on the flip side is that how do we guarantee to the person that's receiving the money that it's a guarantee that we won't recall it? So we need to work out as an industry, something that actually makes sense for both parties. So and it's equitable and it's and it's simple and it's transparent to all the parties involved.
Let's have a think. I think one final, very quick question on blockchain. Is there a simple diagram anywhere explaining sort of in layman's terms how it works? I'm sure I've seen one actually.
Yeah. So there's not I've not seen what I would call a simple diagram. I've seen it explained to me very, very simply. And there's if you go onto Google and search for blockchain diagram, there are some very useful descriptions. The best way I've seen it described, and I'm sorry, this is not me. This is what I've read somewhere, so it's not this is someone else's idea, not mine. It's where imagine if your bank account was an open ledger and everyone could see what the transactions were. And that all the transactions of all the banks were shared across one place, and everyone could see everyone's transactions. So that's an oversimplified route, but it's potentially something that is explaining it.
The key in that being that you have to be authorised to view those transactions.
You have to be authorised to view, yeah. So it's not just anyone can look, but it is available if you have the right authority to view those transactions.
Yeah.
And I think there's someone submitted it's quite rightly identified. If you search blockchain on YouTube, you'll come up with some very, very interesting things.
Right.
I think, as I said, this is an early bit of technology. Actually, its roots go back to sort of just after the Second World War, if you trace them all the way back to the mathematics involved. But I think we'll see it evolve over the next few years, and a bit like how the internet evolved in the 90s into where we are now. I think you'll see it evolve into something very useful.
Yeah. I think one last question to pose, which I'll be selfish, is sort of a question from me. How should the treasurer best get involved in this? It strikes me there's a whole bunch of goodies here which are potentially useful for the business. And the business might or might not be aware of many of them. And indeed, the business might come to you and say, oh, we'd love to do this. Can you set us up? How does the treasurer make a start in all this?
So we were looking at one another. There's a number of answers to that. Of course, there are the very fine webinars that put on places like this, but also ourselves, and I dare say there are other providers who are on different seminars from time to time. There are reports out there, but also if you're sort of one of the customers of any of the major banks, you sit down with your relationship manager and say, this is where my business is going. I've heard about all this stuff and help me, what's coming around the corner. And we'll have access to people like myself and where we can share this knowledge.
Okay, yeah. Let's talk to people, listen and talk.
Yeah, so I recommend, the corporate treasurer speak to their relationship manager, and they can either, and no doubt their own bank or their own provider has similar sessions to these, and get involved.
Okay.
Yeah, but we're more than happy, though, to support any of those conversations.
Brilliant. Okay, well, look, I think we're about to run out of time, so I better do some wrapping up. If someone could move the slides forward. Very kind, thanks. Gosh, key points for me, I think simply the speed with which the payments landscape is changing. I think particularly influences outside the sort of the classical, I suppose, the classical product suite and the classical territories of, sort of the developed in past tense economies, particularly China and elsewhere in Asia. I think one of the comments I've heard sort of almost in the background is that I think one has to be selective, suit what you're using to the business and also where you're doing business. And in many cases, less may well be more. And also the importance of keeping up to date, both with the technical developments, but also with sentiment in the market and with operating units. So I'd like very much to thank Damien and Teresa for presenting, to RBS for their sponsorship. Thank you to everyone who joined today's session, and I'm sorry if we didn't reach your question within the allotted time. As I mentioned at the start, we'll be putting up a recording of this webinar on the ACT website along with the presentation in 2 days' time, and we'll send you all the link to that. Just looking forward to forthcoming events from the ACT, particularly on topic, a couple of them. There's the Cash Management Conference in London on the 10th and 11th of February. We've got our Europe conference in Düsseldorf on the 9th of March. And we've got the annual conference, 18th to the 20th of May, at which RBS will be running a panel specifically to follow up some of the issues we've aired here and to develop them further. So, thank you all for listening. If you can spare a moment to provide some feedback on the webinar, we'd be very grateful. Just select the feedback widget in red from the bottom bar, and the facility to do this will remain open for a short while after the webinar ends. But from all of us here, thank you and goodbye.